Hello, welcome to the Trauma-Informed SLP. How's everybody doing today? I hope you're doing okay. All right. On the docket for today, what am I going to be talking about? I want to share a bit of my mental health journey because I want to get into videos talking about unpacking my own internalized ableism and some things I've realized about myself since understanding my neurodivergency and that kind of stuff. It's really helped me kind of sort of put my own sense of self within a place in like society and stuff in a way that I didn't do prior to that diagnosis. And also, quite frankly, because I'm essentially a non-apparent neurodivergent, at least as far as YouTube is concerned, I think there's going to be people who are like, you aren't actually neurodivergent. You're just one of those people who thinks it's trendy to be neurodivergent. And it's like, okay, well, first off, I'm not exactly sure why it is. It seems to be a known fact that the people who can diagnose neurodivergency would be like neuropsychologists, childhood bullies, and people on the internet. Apparently, those are the only people who can actually like diagnose it, I guess. Being a little facetious there, but nonetheless, that seems to be a thing. So I wanted to talk about my mental health journey because my realization about my neurodivergency, personally, I don't think it would have happened without going to mental health first, getting mental health treatment and counseling and medication and stuff like that. For me, I think it was essential to unpack all of that in order to understand what is actually neurodivergency in my brain versus what is mental health stuff and like trauma and things like that. Fun things. Now, I don't think this is necessarily true to everybody. Other people can probably figure out their neurodivergency and then figure out mental health. But for me, this is the path I took. Maybe I am biased in thinking this is the main way it needed to go for me because it is how it happened. But yeah, so we've got to start with mental health a little bit. Also, I just want to talk a little openly about my own experiences with depression and stuff, not in a lot of detail, but just in enough, just in case there's people out there who are struggling who want to know, like, should I seek some help for this? And also because I'm very open with the fact that, yes, I take sertraline, generic Zoloft. I'm on that. I take that every day. It works really well for me. And I was definitely one of those people who resisted medication for a long time. So I just wanted to share my story also, just in case there are people out there who are wondering if it would help them or not, or in general, I just want to tear down the stigma a little bit more because I think sometimes the stigma goes away, but then it kind of swings back to like you should just be doing it with food and lifestyle changes and stuff like that, which is true for some, not always true for all. Not everybody can manage our mental health with lifestyle changes. Some of us need some external help in the form of medical treatment, in the form of medication, and I guess other treatments too, depending on what you have. With all that said, little disclaimer, of course, I am not a mental health practitioner, actually. I'm trauma-informed, yes, but I'm a speech language pathologist. We're not mental health practitioners. I don't do any direct treating of mental health. Anything I do for mental health pretty much stops at mental health first aid, which is an actual like program thing you can be trained and learn how to do, which is to essentially kind of normalize and validate and affirm, support people when they're having some kind of a mental health crisis, and also hopefully make sure they don't harm themselves or others. But that's pretty much the extent of like where I would pretty much stop with mental health stuff. My journey is my journey. It is not the way everybody experiences depression. It is not the way everyone experiences their mental health by any means. My type of depression is my type of depression. It's not everybody's. And so this is not intended to be any kind of medical advice or anything like that. This is really just, I'm putting this out there for educational purposes and maybe for some validation for folks out there if you are struggling at all and if this resonates with you. That's pretty much my whole point. And to hopefully break down a little bit of the stigma around talking about mental health, especially in speech language pathology, but also in society at large. Let's start breaking some of that down, essentially. That's what I'm hoping to do here. And so if you feel like you are struggling, please, please, please seek out licensed professionals in your area who can help you. And I'll give you some tips, I guess. I think I will later on probably give you some tips on like how to kind of find somebody, but I don't even have the best tips. So hopefully I can find a link or something to put below for additional resources and help in finding people. So let's get going. Even more bisexual finger guns. Hey, it's a very bisexual finger gunny kind of day. If I had my hair, I would flip it, but it's like this. Here's the deal. I have struggled with mental health, I think, pretty much my entire life. I also think it kind of runs in my family a bit. I don't know whether it's epigenetic, meaning like the way our genes happen to express across the generations, or what. But I think honestly a little bit of neurodivergency, but also definitely like depression and stuff, I think pretty much runs in my family. I am probably the first person, or at least the first person I know of, to seek consistent treatment for it. So that's why I say upon reflection, because my family's not the best at talking about mental health and mental health needs. In fact, I grew up in Georgia, in Augusta, Georgia. Sup, Augusta? Haven't seen you in a while. But I grew up there. And so growing up in the southern states in the United States, mental health culturally is still very much, I would say, still currently stigmatized a lot around there. And so it's a lot of like faith-based, if you are depressed, it's because your faith's not strong enough, like that kind of thing. It's Bible Belt kind of stuff, right? But even within my family, even with family members who were definitely struggling with their mental health as I was growing up, I just heard a lot of like kind of bad talk about those family members, right? About them being like kind of weak, or like always wanting other people to do stuff for them, or like not being willing to like lift themselves up by their bootstraps, which I hate that phrase. I was so happy to find out. Like when I was a kid, I remember asking my dad what bootstraps were, and he said they're sort of like shoelaces, is pretty much the closest thing he could get. And so I remember being in the yard and literally trying to pick myself up by my shoelaces. So I discovered when I was like 3 or 4 that you can't pick yourself up by your own like shoe things, like your shoelaces, bootstraps, whatever it is. You can't just like lift yourself from underneath you. That's not a thing. Okay. Not that like mechanically. You know, you can do it like if you're a gymnast, you're doing it like pushing yourself up from the ground, but not from like your feet like that. So I always thought that phrase made no sense to me. And then I found out the person who made that statement literally was trying to make the point that they were trying to say something you can't do. They're trying to say like nobody can actually do that because no one's an island. We all exist connected to society and community and other humans. And so like nobody can actually just pick themselves up. So I feel very validated in my neurodivergent, taking it literally all this time and going, it makes no sense. And other people being like, you just don't understand it. And now I'm like, haha, it's society that failed to understand it and co-opted it and started using it incorrectly. I was right all along. So that's pretty much what I grew up hearing, is that like the family members that I saw that I could honestly say likely, you know, they were showing a lot of signs of like mental health stuff as I was a kid. I would be in the room. If they weren't there, I would be there while my grandparents and my parents and other people would be talking about them like they just, you know, weren't a good enough person, basically. Like they didn't try hard enough, they were a little too lazy, they were codependent, people enabled that behavior, and that was the source of it all. Like everybody had sort of a judgment, essentially a very stigmatized judgment around those family members. And so from a very young age, I internalized the idea that like it was bad to be suffering, basically. Essentially showing signs of suffering in my family was a bad thing. And that definitely got reinforced through other things as well. So because I grew up in that, as I moved into adulthood and stuff, I definitely struggled and had a lot of issues, but never really sought help for them. Just thought they were things I needed to just sort of stuff down, or I would try to share them with like new friends, but then kind of get into that like oversharing, info dumping thing. And then that would be very off-putting, especially to younger people who also don't have the capacity to handle your own mental health stuff. Like, to be fair, apologies to everybody who knew me in my 20s. I pretty much was trying to use friends as mental health support and like friends can provide some validation, sure, and some affirmation and maybe a safe place to feel feelings, but not necessarily like they're not the same as a professional. I'll put it that way. And especially when you're like a teenager or a young adult, like most people in that age don't really have the capacity to really like support somebody through incredibly serious stuff. Like you need a professional to help you with that, really, quite frankly. And accessing that is a whole different discussion because I also didn't have the money at that point in my life. I was trying to do the musician thing. So yeah, I didn't have the money. Through my 20s, I pretty much didn't have healthcare. So I didn't really see doctors at all for like a decade. Then I started coming into this field, speech language pathology, and I started the graduate studies in this field in my 30s, kind of mid 30s. And then after I finished the 2 years of master's, I did stay around for an extra 2 years attempting to do a PhD, which fell through. Partly due to mental health stuff and my need to step away. So basically, the first time I really saw a counselor, now, caveat is prior to that, when I was like a freshman in undergrad, little babby, like 19-year-old, at one point I did get referred to a counselor and I saw them like once. And then later in my master's for my music degree, my MM, my master's of music, I did see a counselor once there too. On referral. And in both cases, I kind of talked myself out of needing therapy. So like as in I went to it knowing I didn't want to go at all, quite frankly. But when they asked me things about how I was doing, I had very rational, thought through, detailed intellectual things to say about how I cope with things and how I'm dealing with it and blah, blah, blah. And it made me seem very reasonable. And whether or not I tricked them or not, I don't know. But I didn't, they didn't see a need for me to come back, essentially. Like, you don't have to come back if you don't want to. So I'm like, okay, great. Winning. Didn't want to see them anyway, right? Because I had definitely internalized that message that getting help for this stuff was a sign of weakness, was a sign of an issue with me. So I never wanted to actually continue that kind of treatment. No offense to the counselors, it was me. But also I knew what to say to make it seem like I was in a much better place than I actually was. I knew how to mask, basically. I had already mastered like masking my emotions. I knew how to do that. So, and I knew how to talk, I definitely had that neurodivergent, like wise soul thing when I was younger. And of course, now that I'm an adult, I'm seen as childlike. So, you can't win. But I definitely had that in the sense that I could talk with a lot more maturity than, which would make people think, oh, she's got this, she's fine, and I wasn't fine at all. I was not fine at all, but I did it anyway. So here's what essentially happened. Here's where I started getting consistent treatment. And it was thanks to my spouse, first off. He was the one who showed the most concern. And I went to get help because of that. So why did he see concern? So it was near the end of my first spring semester in the Master's of Speech Language Pathology. Speech Language Pathology master's programs are very intense. They're extremely high intensity. We take a lot of credits in 2 years, and we do a lot of clinic along with academic stuff. So it's very rigorous. It's very time consuming. My anxiety was definitely through the roof. I was having anxiety attacks, panic attacks, like upwards of 3 to 4 times a week during that semester. It was a very hard semester, especially for my master's cohort in general. We were all struggling pretty bad. It was a pretty rough semester. And normally for me, whenever I had been through a really high stress time, once I get out of that stress, you have that like energy dip, right? You get kind of like that burnout. I just kind of want to sit on my couch and veg for like a day or two, right? But this time around, my sitting on the couch and vegging took like 2 weeks, basically. I didn't have motivation to do anything. I just wanted to lay around in my pajamas on the couch all the time. And I felt emotionally nothing. I was extremely flat emotionally, felt very, very numb. And my main way to cope with this before was just to sort of wait it out. So that's what I was doing. I was waiting it out until that numbness would go away. And my spouse kept asking, how am I doing? And I'm like, oh, it's just burnout. I'm fine. It'll be fine. This is normal for me. And then there was a point where I think 2 weeks in, he looked at me and he's like, it's actually not normal for 2 weeks to have no motivation and no emotion. That's not normal to be 2 weeks of completely flat. And I'm like, it's not? Are you sure? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I kind of felt better after like a day or two of rest. I felt like I want to go and do things that are fun, but like you're just still very flat. And so, thanks to that very honest approach of his, he was like, why don't you go to the mental health center at the school, at the university? And I'm like, okay, sure. And I was still very hesitant. I was still very scared. We were at the University of Arizona in Tucson. So I went to I believe it's called CAPS, the Student Health Center there, Mental Health Center. And I went in, I believe, the very next day, actually, after he said that, I went in when they were open. And I remember physically shaking, like as if you're cold, like having a shiver kind of a thing, because I was scared. I was super scared of going. And I had this feeling like I was betraying all my principles. I was betraying the fact that I always felt, hey, I was pretty smart. I'm sure I can figure out my own brain myself. That was something I always thought. And I was betraying the principle of like, you're a strong person if you don't need the help. I was betraying the sense of like, only losers go, or crazy people, or whatever. Like all of that internalized stigma was just, it was making me shake. I was so scared of what I was doing. It's like, why am I here? And what am I getting into? And what is this going to be? And like, I was genuinely scared of it. But I kept going because I believed my spouse when he said this wasn't normal and he wanted me to get help because he just wanted me to feel better and he couldn't do it. He was like, I can't help you with this and I really want you to feel better. And I think that was the first time at that point, at least that I had recalled. I'm sure other people had attempted to tell me that before, but that was the first time I really felt like it was coming from a very genuine place from someone I felt very safe with and felt like, if he's noticing this, then he's probably right. And I probably should get help. And as he had said, like, what's the harm in going in and just checking it out? And he's like, you can stop going if it doesn't work or if it's not the right place for you, but why not check it out? It's essentially a free service for us, essentially. And I was like, yeah, that's a good point. Like, the center's right there. It's set up for students. I think there might have been a very, very small copay, but like $5 kind of a thing, maybe. Like, it was the kind of thing where like almost no one in the United States gets access to mental health care that easily. So he's like, do it because we're here. Might as well. You have access to it. So this is 2013, just so you know, have a sense of like years. So this is like 11 years ago that I went in shaking and sort of trembling. And I remember the front desk people, when they asked what I was there for, the only thing I could think to say is, I think I need help. And that's literally all I could say. And then they had to like, it was like taking a little babby by her hand to be like, are you here to see someone? And do you have an appointment? No? Okay, do. And they like took me through a little step by step of like, okay, well, here's the paperwork for you to fill out. And we're going to have someone, it's called a triage. Someone's going to come in and they're going to ask you about yourself and your history. And then they'll match you with somebody. And I was like, okay, great. So they gave me the little questionnaires. There's like a little depression questionnaire and an anxiety questionnaire. Other people probably have filled out something like that at like a doctor's office, like a screener kind of questionnaire. And also like case history, like your whole life history, family history of mental illness, things like that. So I filled all that stuff out. And then this very kind older gentleman came in, and I believe he was a counselor. He was a licensed counselor, but also a pastor, I think. So I think I was a little nervous because like, oh man, he's going to like do the like religious, like shamey thing. That's what I thought, because I grew up in an area where that's probably would have been the first thing they said. If I had seen pastor, I would have been like, right? So I was a little scared about that, but he was a really great guy. And he didn't do no shaming, nothing like that. He did a lot of validation, honestly, like when I was telling him how I was feeling and stuff, and he looked over my paperwork. And I remember near the end, he was just saying like, it's very common for people who've been through your experiences to feel this way and to really need some help. And I'm really glad you came in. And then the way they did it is he had a list of all the providers there, all the mental health providers. He had this list of them. And then he circled like 3 names on that list. And he handed me that paper and he said, go to the front desk and have them schedule you with whoever out of these 3 people is available first. I think these 3 will be the best match for you here at the center. So just have them schedule with whoever's available first so you can get help as fast as you can. Or as, we can get you in quickly, right? And I was like, great. So I went there. They made it super easy. That's what I'm saying. Like, this is like probably the ideal of what mental health access should be in the United States, but really isn't. So it was really a good call for me to go there. Good call on the spouse's part of going there because it's there and it's set up for students, and like they made it a really easy process, which is great. And actually a pretty comfortable process, especially for someone like me who was like trembling in fear about showing up at all, So so I went to the front desk and they scheduled me with the first person, and I think I had my first session like within just a few days after that. Like the person was available sometime later that week or whatever. So I had my very first counseling session with this really nice lady. I cannot remember her name because I'm really bad at names. And I might have an email somewhere that had her listed as like an appointment, but genuinely don't know her name. I don't even know if she's still there at the University of Arizona in the CAPS program, but she was really good. She was an experienced therapist. She'd been doing it for like 20 years, I think, or 15 to 20 years at that point. And she had a lot of experience, and she was really, really nice and very like wise in a way really good mental health people are, like really good at like getting to the heart and saying what I need to say to help like kind of help me process stuff, which was really great. So I went to her, I told her about my history, like she had already seen my little triage intake, and she asked me some additional probing questions about certain things, including like childhood trauma experiences and stuff. And we landed on a memory that was very, very triggering for me. And she recommended that we try some EMDR, which is that rapid eye movement desensitization thing. And so we did that to help deprogram triggers. Now, here's the thing with direct trauma treatment is my understanding now as a trauma-informed person and having gone through some trauma-informed trainings is that the best treatment for trauma these days is considered some combination of bottom-up regulation. So like making sure your parasympathetic, your rest digest system is still active. So you don't go straight into all sympathetic, fight, flight, freeze, like full on trauma response. You want to be able to keep your body a little more calm. And then, so that's the bottom up, is the regulation piece of like being able to calm yourself a bit if you need to, right? So you don't go full on trigger, full on trauma, like you're reliving it, like flashback kind of thing, right? Like you don't want to have that experience. That's not a great experience to have because you feel like you're kind of trapped in the trauma. You feel like you'll never get out of it. So you don't want to do that. So you want to be able to like decrease that physiological response to the memory so you don't feel like you're trapped in that fight, flight, or freeze response. And then top-down processing gets added to that. So you have some combination of bottom-up, calming the body, making sure the trauma memory, the emotional memory of that trauma doesn't overtake the physiology, and then top-down processing. So if you can maintain a little more calmness, you have a connection, your anterior cingulate, your frontal lobe stuff, this like more frontal lobe area of your brain, your seat of where you're actually aware of things and conscious, that can start to talk to that emotional memory and start to like integrate it into who you are now and your present day and that kind of thing. And so EMDR is basically one of the many, there's many out there, one of the many different techniques and protocols for combining that top-down, bottom-up processing, essentially. So that's the one we did. I didn't do eye movement because that felt really weird. I don't like that feeling of looking back and forth with my eyes. It actually kind of hurts a little. And then hearing was too distracting to me because I'm kind of hypersensitive with hearing stuff. And so I was paying way more attention to the sounds, the beep beeps, than I was anything else. So that was too distracting. So we ended up landing on, I called it the buzz buzz. She had these little paddles that I could hold on my palms that would vibrate. So they would alternate the vibration. It would be like, bzz, 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 bzz. That's how it kind of went. And I would hold them in my palms and I would lay them on my legs. So I ended up having that vibration, that alternating vibration on my thighs and on my hands, which probably helped with keeping me a little more grounded in my body. And so she would give me that, and then she would have me go really deep into the memory and recall the memory. And every time she would always ask me these questions beforehand, like, how much do these statements feel true? Like statements like, um, the world's inherently unsafe, or you deserved what happened to you, or that you should have fought back, or you should have done something different. All those, like, those really dangerous narratives that come up in our head from trauma, basically. All those really dangerous, like, shaming kind of narratives about what's wrong with us and why it happened. And a lot of that's from that disconnect of the emotional memory to the frontal cortex. The frontal cortex doesn't understand why it happened, and so it's trying to make up a reason, which unfortunately a lot of the reason it comes up with comes from a lot of different places, but a lot of the messaging ends up being that sort of negative self-talk of like, you deserved it, or you were lazy, or you were, right? So she would ask me how much I felt those statements were true. We would work through the memory with the paddles and stuff. And then afterwards, and while we're working through the memory, she would help my top-down reasoning with like what I felt was true at the time that I was in the memory. She'd be like kind of reframing it a little for me a little bit and help redirect my thoughts a little, which helped me gain more control over the memory and help me integrate like the more genuine reality rather than like the trauma generated reality, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes some amount of sense. So where I would have like maybe I have the thought of coming up of like, well, I totally deserved it because of this, or oh, I should have fought back because of that, or whatever. And she would help me reframe those thoughts, right? And so then at the end of each one, we would go back through those statements, and she would have me, she would re-ask me like on a scale of 1 to 10, how true do these statements feel now? And basically that was how she kept track of how well it was going, because as long as those numbers kept going down, like it didn't feel true that I deserved it, or that I was lazy, or that I was whatever, or that I should have fought that, I should have done this, should have done that. Like as long as it felt less true, those sort of statements, then it was like we're heading in the right direction, basically. So that's what we did. And I think we did like 4 or 5 of those sessions with the same memory. And then after that, a lot of it became like unpacking stuff, but I didn't always need the full on EMDR, like vibrational stuff. I could do my own kind of bottom up, like regulation and calming and stuff, which was nice too, right? Like you need to learn how to kind of do it on your own a bit. So that was really cool to have that experience where it's like, oh, she could give me some strategies to do and some like ways of thinking, some different thought patterns, calm yourself, and then kind of work through these thought patterns and like reframe things that way, right? And kind of help yourself through that sort of thing. And so it was a really great thing. I got a lot of like, I felt very valid and affirmed, and felt like not, the one-off of humanity that had something horrible happen to them because I deserved it more so than any other human in existence, right? Like it's kind of what the shame narrative tells you. And it was nice. It was very, very, very nice to feel like that was not the case. I do remember her saying that like EMDR session, she's like at the end of the session, she's like, schedule this for a day where you don't have a lot of homework or a lot of stuff to do afterwards, because you're going to feel really tired. Like your brain feels tired. And that was 100% true. My brain felt so drained at the end of that, in like a good tired, but like that way of like, if you just took like finals, if you could think back to being a student or something, or maybe you are a student, whenever you took like a ton of exams in a week and you just feel like your brain is like fried and you just need to like do something really mindless for a while. That's kind of what it felt like. It's like, whoo, my brain just burned through a ton of energy and I just need to like go stream some like happy comedy shows and just chill. And after we were done with the EMDR stuff, I still went to see her with things that I was still dealing with, right? And I ended up developing a lot of behavioral strategies to help me cope with any depressive thoughts or anything that was starting to come up the next year. So I had a regime, basically. Not a regime. Regime is like, that's a different word, isn't it? And okay, anyway, I had a regimen where it's like, okay, I have to make sure I eat like this type of stuff and this much vegetable and different colors and eat across the rainbow or whatever. I had to make sure I cooked myself dinner instead of just eating cereal, which is what I did in the depths of depression, because it's easy to eat a bowl of like Cheerios, you know, like not affiliated with Cheerios, but you know, it's just easy. So I ended up doing that and being like, I have to make sure I exercise, and I do exercise on these days, or I do this type of exercise these days. And on my off days, I do stretching and I do meditation and I do all this other stuff. So I had this little regimen I had developed for myself. And I went through the next year feeling a lot better, still having depressive episodes and still having some anxiety attacks, still having some panic attacks, which could have been meltdowns upon reflection. They might have been overstimulation type things and just fatigue and exhaustion leading to that. But nonetheless, I was still having some of those episodes, but on the whole, things had reduced a lot. I felt like, you know, I was keeping up with my sleep hygiene, like going to bed at the same time, even if I didn't fall asleep, and like blah, 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 right? And so I had been doing all the stuff to manage it. And I remember, I believe it was like spring of 2015. I think I was in the PhD program, and I had been doing all this other stuff still and like trying to keep myself, you know, with it and everything. And what ended up happening, I might actually have the years off. I might have started therapy in 2014, actually, when I think about it. But nonetheless, anyway, 10 to 11 years ago is when I started it. It's been a little while, guys. I don't really quite remember, but might have been a PhD program when I started, actually, because I had a lot more time to like go more often. But anyway, so I'd been managing stuff with this behavioral stuff and still seeing my counselor off and on, and maybe like once a month or something. We kind of, you know, because mental health counseling for most people these days, it's not a forever thing. You're not going and doing talk therapy forever. You're going and they're basically teaching you how to be your own therapist, essentially, depending on what your mental health issue is. And then, you know, they're still there for you if you need to come back. But like the ideal is like you kind of, you know, wind down in terms of coming to sessions and are able to manage your own mental health on your own, which is great. You know, we want more autonomy and power to like handle things like that in our life. It's good to have that. So that's where I was at. And I remember there was a spring break week. So no classes, right? We were still there. We were still there in Tucson because he was doing his PhD and I was trying to do PhD. And researching students, PhD students, tend to hang around during holidays because it's actually kind of nice to have campus without all the other students around. It's kind of nice, you know, it feels more chill. So, but I do remember during spring break week, we went to Kartchner Caverns, which is this really cool cave, like state park thing, south of Tucson, southeast or so of Tucson. It's actually wheelchair accessible. It's fully wheelchair accessible. So like super recommend it. Support Kartchner Caverns. It was really cool. And I remember really looking forward to going to it. But the day that we went, that particular week, I was having a really bad depressive episode. And so I felt, and for me, when I was in my depths of depressive episodes, I would still get up out of bed and stuff, but I felt completely numb. I usually felt very dissociated. So I actually looked up dissociative personality disorder at once. I don't think that's what I actually had. I think it was just related to like trauma and depression. But I would just feel like I was observing life and not really experiencing it because I had no emotion, like no emotion. I can't explain it to you because if I can't explain it to people who have never felt it, but like nothing, not sadness, not happiness, not joy, just meh, just neutral, nothing. And I was in that state that week, but I remember thinking maybe still going to the caves will be cool. So we went, and I remember feeling pretty upset at the fact that while we were there, I intellectually really liked it. Like my intellectual brain was wowed at the age of the caves and the rock formations and this and that. But my emotional state was nothing. I still felt nothing. I couldn't feel excited. I couldn't feel curious or how cool it was. Like I didn't have any of those feelings of like, wow, this is so cool. None of that was kicking in. I had no feeling. And I found it upsetting, ironically, even though I didn't have feelings. I guess I think I was just like mentally disturbed by it. Like I was intellectually like, this is disturbing that I'm doing this cool thing. I'm enjoying the facts. This is really cool. but like I emotionally feel nothing. My emotions are not connecting to the experience, not connecting to my thoughts. Nothing's happening. Like I might as well just be laying on. I feel the same in these cool, like multi-thousands of years cave formations as I did sitting on my couch. Like felt the same, and felt very detached from the experience. And so I remember talking about that with my spouse afterwards, with my husband, and like just going through and talking about all of that. And like, he was like, oh, maybe you should go back to your counselor a bit or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, maybe, boo, boo, boo. So then I think I did go back for a few sessions or whatever, felt a little better. By the time, so that was like March, right? So by the time May started coming around of that year, and this definitely was 2015 now that I remember, because we're getting to where I started medication. So at this point, I had been going to the counselor over a year, probably at that point. I think it was about over a year, but not getting any medication. I was managing everything behaviorally with the diet, the exercise, the sleep, right? Like I had a little laundry list in my head of things I needed to do. And even if I was in the depths of like numbness and like total flat, I still needed to go and do those things. Like I still had to keep up with that routine. That was you got to keep going with that, right? Because that's gonna get you out of this, essentially, was how I did that. So then 2015, it was around May or so, sometime in the summer there, I had a depressive dip at the end of the semester, like I usually did, because finals had happened and high stress. I have a lot of anxiety around test taking. So I had the crash that I normally had, felt kind of numb, felt out of it, felt very like disconnected from things and from myself and from the world, very dissociated in that sense. And then I had stuck with my routine though, getting up, getting dressed, eating well, doing exercise, doing meditation, doing all these things, right? And then I was starting to feel better. I was starting to not have that numbness. And I believe it was sometime, I think it was either June or July. I honestly can't quite recall which month. I could look it up. This is something you can look up online these days, but my grandma passed. I had a loss in my family. My final grandparent, the fourth grandparent, passed. And this was the catalyst that sent me into the counselor to ask for a referral to a psychiatrist for medication. Because what essentially happened with her passing was, I remember, okay. If you've ever lost a family member, you know you have to grieve, right? Grieving is just part of it. That comes along with it, And this was my grandma on my mom's side. My grandparents on my mom's side always were very kind to me and very gentle and very loving. And my grandpa had passed years prior. He had Alzheimer's, and he had passed like 10 years or so prior to grandma passing. But it was tough. It was tough having her pass. And so I was hit with grief, of course. The wave of grief came on. But what I thought in my head at the time was, oh no. Because I had just started feeling better from depression. I had just started feeling better from that depressive episode I had at the end of the semester. And I thought, I'm going to be depressed again for like probably 2 months or so. Now that I'm grieving my grandma, this is going to send me back into that depressive, numb, flat. And if I do feel anything, it'll be extreme sadness. It'll send me right back there. I will be right back to that point again for I don't know how long. I don't know how long it'll take for me to force myself to do my routine, for the routine to help my emotions feel better. And having that thought made me feel even worse, if that makes sense. Like it felt awful knowing that I couldn't properly grieve because I was going to have no emotion. That's what was going to happen. I was going to dip into the world of nothing. I was going to go back into this like emotional oblivion, essentially, instead of just feeling the grief and processing through it and actually allowing myself to experience the grief. That wasn't going to happen because the depression was going to take over. And I kind of knew that at that point, because after a year or so of having the ups and downs, I could recognize the signs that here it comes, right? So what I realized through that was, regardless of how well I kept up my routine, no matter how long how much I ate the right things and did the right exercise and slept and got up and got dressed, and no matter what I did, things were still going to happen in life. The depression was not going to go away on its own. I was not going to be able to be completely free of it. And I don't think I had ever been free of depression pretty much my entire life at this point. Like, I think I had always had depressive episodes and just didn't know what to call them and didn't know what to do with them as a kid. But I didn't have the language to describe it. But I remember going through a significant amount, especially for my teenage years. I have very spotty memories as a teenager, very spotty memories as a high schooler. People post stuff on Facebook. Like, there will be pictures with me in the picture and I'll be like, I do not remember that at all. I don't remember being there. I don't remember being around those people, straight up, because I probably was so dissociated. I was probably so like emotionally detached from everything that like I just don't really have a good memory for it, if that makes sense. Like, without the emotional flavor of your memories, it's very hard to keep track of what the heck happened when. Genuinely, it's very hard. So I knew that about myself, and I realized that there wasn't, I was still going to have these numb, flat times. That was going to happen. There were going to be times in my life where I couldn't do anything to feel better. That's why I sought medication, because I had been resisting it that whole time. I had already said to the counselor I was not interested in medication. Don't want to do that. Nope, nope, nope. Could do this on my own. Can do this with the power of my own brain, right? I was still very much in that opinion in my head. And so the grandma's death and the lack of being able to grieve due to emotional numbness of depression and stuff definitely was the kicker of like, life is going to happen. Stuff is going to happen. It's going to be outside of my control. And I'm going to dip. I'm going to have these depressive dips and I can't stop them no matter how much I might want to, right? I also wanted to talk about the emotional numbness a bit for you guys to understand, like the Karcher Cavern thing, like the going and doing something that should have been fun and exciting, because people who've never really experienced like clinical depression, to be fair, here's the thing with clinical depression. It's kind of funny because when you're grieving the loss of something, you essentially are in what would be clinical depression, but clinical depression is when it lasts longer than expected, essentially. Like, grieving things, that's a reasonable time to feel those ups and downs of emotional swells of sadness, maybe a little bit of happiness, right? You have these like waves that come with grief. These big emotional waves happen. That's a natural part of grieving. Clinical depression is usually, there is a certain amount of time you have to have had experienced that. And chronic depression, something that's more like long term, you had to have had experienced it for a bit, which is kind of silly because grief doesn't really have a time frame to end. Like, it is kind of silly that there's like a timeline on that, but I think it's more based on like when the emotional waves usually aren't quite as big for people. Not that it's over, but like that the waves have become smaller and a little more manageable over time. But then for some people it doesn't. Some people it keeps on going and it keeps being really big and really like impairs their ability to live. And for me, instead of having big ups and downs emotionally, I usually would just have dissociative flat, like just no feelings, nothing. And the issue with that is it feels like nothing has any value because, you know, you can't do, like, whether you're on the couch in your pajamas or whether you're out with friends having fun or whether you're at a cool state park cave system learning cool facts, you feel nothing. You feel no difference. Nothing has any value of being better than the other thing. All those options sound equal. So it kind of makes sense that you kind of just want to lay around in your pajamas, because why not spend the money? If all things are going to be equal and flat, might as well not do anything. And I just want to share that because I know there's still sometimes some very good meaning people still feel like if you go out and you do something fun, it'll help you overcome the depression. And that does work sometimes, and it does work for some people, but some people like me, if they're in a depressive, numb, like flat, disconnected state, it's not going to matter where they go or what they do. It's not necessarily going to kick them out of it. So just so you know, just so you hopefully that can at least provide some perspective there. And I'm probably going to link below to the hyperbole and a half depression part 2 post that is old now, but probably the best explanation of this like numbness and lack of emotion that I could ever impart to anybody. Hyperbole and a half definitely posted like the greatest on that. So I'll probably post a link because that is probably the best way to understand. So let's go back to the story here. Let's swing back. So 2015, starting to go into the fall, I started seeing a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist went ahead and put me on sertraline is actually the first thing. Now, I knew going into that, a lot of times when you seek mental health medication, especially for anxiety, depression, there's usually like a trial and error stage of like, not all the medication reacts the same with everybody. And so you might have to try this for a while and then go off of it for a couple weeks and then try a different thing. So I was prepared for it to be this up and down thing, which is another reason why I'd kind of avoided it. It's like, I don't have time for all that, it's kind of how I felt. But now that I knew at that point, I had accepted that like, I can't have emotions probably without this. Like, I'm going to have a lot of flat, numb times in my life if I don't get some help. I was willing to give it a try. It's like, it's worth it, right? Emotions are worth it. Emotions are totally, even if you don't like some of them, even though some of them are uncomfortable, they are worth having. Emotions are definitely worth having. Trust me on that one. So, I went on sertraline, which is generic Zoloft. You start out on a very low dose to get your body used to it. It does some funny things, I think, to the vagus nerve, really, because your digestion gets a little funky funk on that for a couple days, but got over it pretty quickly. And I started feeling better pretty much immediately. I started having feelings, basically. I started feeling a lot less numb pretty quickly. After a couple weeks, I already was feeling better, even on a really low dose. It felt like my emotion system was waking up. It felt like my emotions had been in a coma for a while and now they're just starting to wake up a little bit, like the first little sprigs of spring poking up, like a little seed, a little sprout poking up through the soil. That's kind of what it felt like a little bit. Hopefully that makes some kind of sense. But it was like, ooh, I have little inklings of actual feelings. That's exciting. That's nice. I like this. This is lovely to have. And so then over, I think it took a couple months, 2-3 months of increasing the dosage to get to like a place where anxiety attacks became a lot more manageable and my mood was much more like stable, in the sense that mood, not emotion, right? So like I had this like nice baseline of feeling like kind of peaceful and kind of chill about things, and then would have natural surges of emotion, just the natural up and down, ebb and flow that you should be having. It took a little while to get to a dosage that was there. And so I'm still on it, basically. I have emotion thanks to that medicine. I've tried actually going, I had a psychiatrist try to dial me down on the medication at one point to try to kind of get me off of it. And anxiety attacks came back in pretty strong force and depressive episodes started coming back. So like I'm back on it again. Like I think my brain needs it for some reason. Whatever the mechanism is that's working, it's working pretty well. So and without it, my emotion system just doesn't stay online, basically. Like my emotion system somehow needs the extra little juice. It's like a fuel that keeps it going, and I don't have emotion a lot of emotion without it. Or I have too much and I have like huge anxiety attacks that, for me, anxiety attacks, I think upon reflection, they usually kind of go in toward meltdowns, because to me, a 10-minute anxiety attack is short. And I remember I said that to that psychiatrist who was trying to kind of dial down my dosage. This is later on, after we were gone from graduate school and out in the world. And I was like, I had an anxiety attack. It wasn't too bad though. And she's like, well, how long did it last? And I'm like, about 10 minutes. And she's like, that's actually pretty long for a panic attack. And I'm like, oh, well, that's pretty short for me. Like my prior medication, mine would last like hours, literal hours. Like if by myself without any way to regulate or anyone to help or like any kind of hug or squeeze or anything, like 3 to 4 hours easy, until it's like basically I would just melt down until my body ran out of energy. That was essentially what would happen. So that's where I'm at. I've been back to counseling a few times with other counselors. My very first one is still the best, personally. She's still the best counselor I've had. I guess that gets to my biggest tip, I guess, in terms of seeking help, which is you want to find the right fit. You want to find someone that you feel like understands you and you feel safe with them, and you can feel safe with them. You don't want to feel like they're trying to like coerce you into talking or even like kind of manipulate you at all in the beginning. There shouldn't be anything like that. It really should be about them helping you unpack your own thoughts so that you can make your own choices and have your own power in life, your own autonomy to decide things and to reframe your thoughts on yourself or other people, especially if those thoughts and feelings are debilitating. Like help to reframe those things into something that's not so debilitating, or help you process through them so that they're not debilitating, right? They're not disabling, essentially, from you having relationships. And that's what it should be. Just so you know, that's a good therapy relationship should be really based in safety and feeling like they're looking out for your mental health in terms of your choices, your ability to make choices, and the way you feel about yourself and your place in the world and all that stuff. And it can take a while to find that person that you feel really good with. A lot of mental health people in the United States offer a free consultation, so I would recommend taking that to talk with them and see how it goes. In my experience, the people who take insurance aren't always the best people for you. Unfortunately, a lot of mental health people don't take insurance in the United States because they feel usually a little chokehold. The insurance companies have very specific ideas of what they will reimburse in mental health world, and that actually might hinder progress in treatment more than help it. So not to say that there aren't good counselors out there who do take insurance. There probably are some, but sometimes it's not the case. Unfortunately, when it comes to accessibility and money, it might cost to see somebody, which is very unfortunate. Whole separate conversation, the whole system and how inaccessible it can be. And also, if you have trauma to unpack, it's usually nice, make sure they have some combination of like a bottom up, top down processing type thing where they help your body regulate, calm yourself during a traumatic recalls, and will help you process through those negative thoughts so that you feel more empowered and more like able to see yourself in a true light, in like a more objective light, but even just in a more like self-confident light, rather than like feeling like you're horrible for all kinds of reasons. And hopefully they have training in multiple traumatic direct therapy protocols. Essentially, there's so many out there. I think someone who truly is very knowledgeable in terms of treating trauma likely has training in many different approaches, because it's not a one size fits all type of thing. Like a lot of people need kind of either a mix of different approaches, or this approach works well with this person but not with the other, right? So I did EMDR. It worked really well for me, but that doesn't mean it works for everybody. And also, my experience of EMDR might have, as far as I don't know if that's the experience everybody has with it, or if she kind of did her own, integrated some other techniques into it. I don't know. I'm not versed enough in direct therapy to know. So, yeah, if you're out there and you're struggling, I suggest seeking some help. Because it is worth it. Mental health is definitely worth it. I have left toxic situations since getting that help, because I have learned that my mental health is now very much a priority to me to maintain my mental health and to look after it, because it makes life so much more valuable and enjoyable. And I spent a very long time just trying to push through and trying to ignore and trying to stuff it down and keep it to myself. And I never arrived at a place where I felt very good doing that. I'll put it that way. But I did arrive at a place where I feel a lot more at peace and a lot more capable of having compassion for others and hold space for other people's emotions by doing some healing myself. So it's not great when it comes to mental health stigma. And I don't I don't want to discourage people from self-diagnosing. I think anyone, whenever, from a trauma-informed perspective, whenever I see any, like, I'm not on TikTok, but if I ever see TikTok videos like reposted places and stuff of like, oh, look at these, look at these youths, as Schmidt on New Girl would say, diagnosing themselves with mental health disorders and this sort of stuff. I actually just see people who are struggling to figure out who they are and how their brain works and why they might feel the way they feel. They might feel something is wrong and they just don't know what it is. And quite frankly, our system does not make accessibility to diagnostic procedures and professional help very easy. So I can understand them being confused and wondering. Learning your mental health situation, whether it's clinical or not, whether you have a clinical diagnosis that's in the DSM-5 or not, whether you fit those sort of categories or you're just struggling a bit and you just need some clarification with things, it's all complex because every human is very complex. And so it's unlikely to be the kind of thing where I relate to one thing on a list, therefore I have this thing. Very, very unlikely. Because you are a complex person. I am a complex person. We are all complex people with complex pasts and histories and perspective of things in our brains. And then also you throw in how brains can be wired and how they can be wired so differently. And it's like, it just gets to be extremely complex. And so, I want to discourage people, I guess, from feeling any level of anxiety around I related to one part of that story, so maybe that's what's wrong with me. It's like, I can't say. And if you can't say, you can always take a breath first off and be like, okay, relating to one thing, one aspect of somebody's story is a very human thing to do, extremely human thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have everything they have or that you have a diagnosis or not. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but it might mean if you feel like you are struggling with something and it is way too hard and it's beyond your ability to really handle, regardless of how well you might relate to somebody's diagnosis or not, seek some help. Like, go ahead and get on a wait list for somebody. Hopefully you have some sort of access to the financial support needed, or go to like a community health center and see if they have any resources for mental health accessibility that is not that's like on a sliding scale, for example, like one where it's not going to break your bank trying to go and get the help. And like, see if you can get an objective professional opinion on what your struggle is and what your options might be. So I don't want my story to become a source of anxiety for someone out there. I don't want you to feel like, oh no, I might have something really, really, really wrong with me. But I know in my experience, when I felt that there was something wrong with me and I was so determined to overcome it and to not have something wrong with me, determined I can fix this myself, that kind of thing. If I had heard somebody talk and tell them the story that I just told, like if you send this message back in time to past me, there would be times I would definitely deny it. And there would have been times in my life where it would have scared the heck out of me. The idea that I did actually have something wrong with me would have been so scary. That whole idea would have been terrifying. And there also were times where I would have been like, yeah, I know I have something wrong with me, but I still don't actually need help. There were definitely times where I felt like that too. So if you're dealing with any of that kind of feeling where you feel like you're just different and other, and you have stuff you're struggling with that you can't share with other people, you can find somebody somewhere in this world, ideally, hopefully a well-trained professional to help you unpack that sort of a thing, and it's definitely worthwhile. And that is my opinion, but I feel it's incredibly worthwhile to find good mental health, to have keep your mental health in a nice, healthy state. I remember my counselor, she said this at first when I first started going, where she said, really, your mood, like your kind of like average feeling all the time, should actually be this sort of nice peacefulness. She's like, you should feel at peace. That should be your neutral, should be peaceful. And that blew my mind when she said that. I was like, really? Because I had never felt that before, ever. I was like, my baseline should be like, cool. I'm at peace. I'm all right. I'm relaxed. I'm okay with me. I'm okay with me, and I can deal with what comes my way because I'm okay, right? It feels restful and peaceful. That should be your baseline. And I was like, that is crazy, because I've never felt that. And I remember, I think I even like, I was like, really though? Like, for reals? And I was like, how is that even possible? And she's like, that's what good mental health is feeling. And then your emotions can come and go. You can have happy, you can have sad, you can have all these other emotions, but they just kind of wave around that sort of baseline feeling of being at peace with things, you know, and with yourself. And I was like, wow, okay, that sounds nuts. But now that I have the medication, and now that I've had the therapy and have the techniques that I still use to help process things, she was right. For me, it took medication to attain that level of feeling at peace, but she was right. That is actually possible. As someone who thought she was crazy when she told me that, it was possible. And so that's just what I want to encourage. Caveat to that is, I don't know how possible it is for all mental health situations. I'm sure there are certain disorders that can make that a nigh on impossible task to attain peace. But I don't know. I can't speak to those things because I am not a mental health expert. I don't know. I hope that's not the case, but I don't know. And I just don't want to invalidate anyone out there who says like, yeah, but like not for this particular thing. Like, I struggle with something that's a bit bigger than that, which is fair, you know, totally fair. I'm only talking about my own experience with depression and anxiety and stuff like that. So I hope this helps someone out there. If you just want to know a little more about a mental health journey from someone in their mid 40s who has been through some stuff and who's not like so young that I get thrown by the latest like TikTok trend or whatever in terms of mental health and awareness and labels and stuff, that we are all on our own journey. And it's very human to feel like something is wrong. It's also very human to feel like you can't handle things sometimes. Sometimes life does give us a little more than we can handle, and it's okay to get some help. If life gives you more than you can handle, it's okay to seek help for that. So that's the start. That's the start of my mental health journey. The next step will be talking about my ADHD diagnosis, maybe a little bit of the autistic overlap I have, but also want to talk a little bit about like, thanks to all of this mental health stuff, I was able to recognize what internalized ableism feels like. Because, spoiler alert, it feels like trauma. Like a lot. Feels a lot like trauma. So that is part of the unpacking of the internalized ableism, which is a thing I want to talk about for folks, because maybe it'll help to bridge the double empathy problem, as coined by Damien Milton, where us neurodivergents get so misunderstood by neurotypicals because our baseline way of communicating just is not the same. So let me know in the comments below if there's other topics you want to know about, or if I overstepped at all, please let me know in the comments below, because I will re-edit this and re-upload. All right. With all that said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. And, you know, as always, up in here, we keep it weird. Bye, guys.